What kind of risks are there that we need to take into account when we're thinking about digitalizing, when we're thinking about decarbonating, and what can we do about this?
Welcome to the Shipping Podcast, where I meet interesting maritime professionals sharing their passion for the shipping industry and their everyday job. I am your host. My name is Lena Gothberg. Hello, Shipping Podcast lovers, and welcome to the 160th episode of the Shipping Podcast. This is the podcast where you hear me talk with maritime professionals about the maritime industry, where we are and where we are heading. If you are here for the first time, make sure that you follow the Shipping Podcast on your podcast platform of choice and become part of the tribe that gets to listen to new episodes as soon as they are released. It's interesting times we're living right now, in more ways than one. Of course, we're going through a pandemic in different stages, but the maritime industry is also in the middle of a paradigm shift. We have realized the potential of a digitalized world, and at the same time, we're aiming to become a carbon-neutral contributor to the society. It's an era of transformation. As we need to think about the risks that are involved when we stand with one foot in the old world and one in the new, or if we haven't even taken a stand yet, DNV has put together a white paper called Closing the Gap in an Era of Transformation. I grabbed the opportunity to speak to the project lead on this white paper. Her name is Fenna van der Merwe, and she leads the Human Factors discipline at DNV in Oslo. Welcome to the Shipping Podcast. Could you please introduce yourself?
Yes, well, thank you very much for having me. So my name is Fenna van der Merwe, and I am a principal consultant in Maritime Advisory, which is part of DNV. So what I do in my daily job is to work with the human factor. My focus is mainly on safety and risk and reliability from a human perspective. I have a background in cognitive psychology, so that's why my interest is particular on the person and the human element and risk related to the people side of things.
How did you come in contact with the shipping industry?
To be very honest, by coincidence. I studied psychology and did a PhD in how young children learn mathematics. So it was more the mathematics didactic side. And I really enjoyed that. But then life changed, life happened. And my husband and I decided to move to Norway from the Netherlands. Really looking forward to enjoying the Norwegian nature, which we do. And then, but moving to Norway without a network resulted in me ending up in a company that was focused on oil and gas, the oil and gas industry in Norway. So I used my human factors expertise in oil and gas. And then I heard about a position in DNV they were looking for human factors experts in maritime. So I thought, well, that's a good next step. And I was looking forward to kind of using more of a creative side of my background and being able to apply that more in the maritime industry than I was able to in oil and gas, which is in the type of work that I was doing. It was very more kind of check in the box type of work. Whereas in maritime, you can work with all sorts of things, safety culture, but also instant investigations and really working together with shipping companies to improve the safety at sea and to work on behalf of and for crew on board and the organizations around them. So I really found my place there. And that's almost 8 years ago that I started there. And have been working in shipping then since then.
I see you got the bug. I mean, the bug you will never leave again. That is what happens with people that come to our industry.
Yeah.
How was your first meeting with the industry? Did you think it was different from what you've been doing before, or?
Yes, I've spent a lot of time trying to get my head around the regulations, how things work from kind of a formal perspective, how class works, what is classification, what is the role of advisory in classification, and how then shipping companies maneuver themselves within the regulations of IMO and within everything. The kind of what can they decide themselves and what is regulated. But I was just stunned by and very inspired by kind of the breadth of the international side of things. So I've had the pleasure of a lot of projects all over the world, being able to travel on board and meeting people on board, but also on shore, and just all of these kind of miniature cultures coming together to bigger cultures in one shipping company. So I really enjoy becoming a part of that, kind of a chameleon, becoming a part of that to be able to understand it and then see what we can do to improve the safety culture, for example, or the way things are being done on a day-to-day basis. So yeah, just again, this breadth, this international nature, it feels like, you get up in the morning and you look out of the window and then you're still in touch with another side of the world. That's really inspiring.
Yes, it is. And nowadays we are doing it from home.
Yeah, and still. Yes.
Which was totally impossible 2 years ago, something like that.
Exactly, yeah.
But it's interesting to hear people in the industry now talking about working from home as something completely natural.
Yeah.
Because it is.
It is, and still, I mean, I have days where I start my day with a colleague in Oslo, and then it goes to a colleague in Ålesund, and then it goes to a colleague in the Netherlands, and then by the end of the day, someone in the US, and it works. I don't even really think about it until the end of the day when I reflect and talk to my husband about what I experienced, what happened to my day. So it's wonderful that's possible. But what I do miss is being able to travel to really experience it firsthand. So a lot of what we're talking about now is more relatively from a theoretical perspective, and I'm missing kind of the tangible experience to have seen things myself, to have talked to people on board myself, because that makes it so much easier to communicate that upwards into an organization. So I'm looking forward to that part of the work coming back again.
I totally agree with you. And I miss meeting people because I'm the curious type. I want to hear, I want to listen to what they are talking about and what's at the top of their minds and so on.
Yeah.
So that bridge over to why we are talking on this episode. You have been co-writing and be project lead on a white paper from DNV called Closing the Safety Gap in the Era of Transformation, which I found very interesting.
Good. Yes.
How did that come about?
That's a process that started about 2 years ago internally, where many of us got together and realized, safety is at the core of our business. That's the purpose of DNV, is to safeguard life, property, and the environment. And because it's so at the core, there's a tendency that it kind of becomes something that's just given and taken for granted. So we wanted to raise that again, the focus, and highlight it in everything that we do, make it more explicit, both internally but also externally, just to highlight once again that this still and always has been at the core of our business. So that was kind of the beginning, trying to highlight that through communication, through kind of rewording the initiatives that were already going on, that were already focused on safety, but just pointing that out again. And then we thought, why can't we materialize this into something that is so relevant now, namely in all of these kind of the turbulent times and the changes that are going on, both in terms of the pandemic, because the pandemic is really showing how resilient the industry is and how well we're capable of coping with the challenges along our way.
Especially the crew members. I just have to highlight that.
Exactly. Yes. No, please do. Absolutely. I mean, that's we haven't even touched on the issues with crew and their welfare at the moment. So definitely, but also on a kind of broader perspective, looking into the future. And the paper is called Transformation in an Era of Transformation, because so much is happening, but particularly in light of digitalization and decarbonization. So it's even being abbreviated to double D, 2 times D. Almost everyone has heard about it or has been talking about it or reading about it, which is excellent because, I mean, innovation will drive the industry forward. The problem, though, is because there's kind of this feverish focus to becoming more digitally smart and to meeting the goals to become more carbon neutral and reducing carbon footprint, the discussions around safety are again lagging behind. I have to put this carefully because, of course, safety is still there, and everyone will still underline and confirm that safety is the most important thing. But still, I'm missing it in the discussions. I'm missing it in the media. I'm missing it in the dialogues that we're having when we're talking about digitalizing and decarbonizing. So therefore, we decided to write a white paper to highlight the safety-related risks that need to be tackled in order to achieve these ambitions. Because no doubt digitalization is something that's good for the industry. Decarbonization is good for the industry and has to happen. But we can't achieve either of them if we haven't taken into account address safety. So that's what we're trying to put out in this paper. And the paper is very high level with the intention of it sparking discussion. So it's a catalyst for discussion to get these discussions going about what kind of risks are there that we need to take into account when we're thinking about digitalizing, when we're thinking about decarbonating, and what can we do about this? So it offers a framework with themes, with topics to discuss and to put on the table, with the intention of generating more projects, more initiatives that then drop out of this paper, both internally and externally, with, of course, one of the main messages being collaboration. We need to work together to make this happen. So that's the standpoint in the paper. With all eyes focused on digitalization and decarbonization, we have to stay just as committed to safety. And how can we do that? That's part of the paper.
Yeah, because if you take a little bit longer view on this, I mean, when digitalization started, it was a little bit, we are an old-fashioned and traditional industry, and everyone was like, oh no, that won't happen to us. It started there. And then after a while, it started to seem that maybe that industry revolution was impacting them on land, at least.
Yeah.
They could see benefits. And then I think a lot of I'm talking about the ship owners because I've been mainly speaking to them, they were starting to get a little bit curious and maybe, someone in one company could maybe carry that burden of being the digitalized or the digitalization leader or whatever. And then after a while, you could see, maybe there is a need for a small department. Or maybe we should be more people.
Yes.
And then I could see ship owners buying entities where, startups, where people were starting digitalization and new things and all of that. And then for a while, I could see that they were hiring a lot of consultants to do their digitalization, to capture all this data and AIS and all of that. But now I think it's starting to move into the actual companies. And that is why it's so interesting to read your report and to listen to what you're saying. Because, I mean, there is the old world, which is probably the bigger part still. Old vessels, old way of doing things.
Yeah.
The same so-called old people doing the same thing. And then there is a small part of the company and the ship and the ships, the new ships happening.
Yes.
So there is a gap there as well, even though I understand that your white paper is also talking about the knowledge gap.
Yeah. I would say it's probably kind of a snowball effect where one starts with it and then others see that it really is helping in improving performance and efficiency and cost cutting. Effects as well, the consequence of that, which is not too unimportant. But absolutely, and there that snowball effect can latch on other shipping companies, but it's also very easy then to go too fast, where the safety-related risks are not addressed enough or not realized enough. So the focus on the paper is what we would call holistic risk management, that it is so important to not only look just at the technology, so the software and all the gadgets around it. So the kind of the sparks, we all know that it looks nice and it's probably useful, but we don't exactly know why it's useful. So the technology, but we need to understand the technology in the context of who is using it. So the end user, but also who the designer or the person maintaining the technology and the software, and the organization. So it's a little bit of what you're saying now, that more and more organizations are engaging vendors and suppliers in who are experts in these digital areas. But the organizations themselves, they need to keep an eye on the overall digital risk. They need to raise digital risk high up enough in the organization so that they make sure that these risks are covered and that they cascade through the organization and across the vendors. How are we going to mitigate these risks? What are we going to do? What kind of culture are we going to have about safety to tackle these risks? But also what kind of competence is necessary across the organization with all these vendors to make sure that everyone is just as aware about the risks associated with the complexity that's introduced because of all of these digital systems. So that's the main risk we see in the digitalization part of the paper, where systems are becoming so complex that it's really difficult to keep an eye on that, and that we cannot rely as much as we used to on component reliability and looking at systems from kind of a mechanical point of view. Because if something breaks down, we can't just now replace it like we used to do with cars, but now we have to change and modify the software, where again, there can be a risk of making it even making the error worse. Or introducing new errors. So we really need to take on another approach of how to test systems and ensure the safety of systems than we used to.
I can also see a problem with that there are no standardized systems in the maritime industry.
Oh yeah, absolutely. That's a major central thing. Because there are so many suppliers and vendors. If we just visit a bridge, for example, or an engine control room, it's a mosaic of different systems, with the result of, for example, issues with alarm management. So we conducted a joint industry project a couple of years ago where we discussed exactly that. So how can we make sure that an alarm management system supports the decision-making process of the end user? How can we make sure that alarms work best when they are needed most, which is not currently the case? And one of the conclusions was exactly that. We need to appoint what we would call a system integrator, someone to keep a bird's eye view, to take into account all of these individual risks and to be able to cover or to make sure that the holistic risk management is taken care of. And that goes to the point in the paper as well of how important user-centered design is in all of this, because everyone, all the stakeholders in the life cycle of a ship and in the industry have a responsibility and an ability to contribute to making systems that are user-centered, so that if something happens, it doesn't have to land on the shoulders of that person on watch at that particular moment in time. We can do a lot to prevent that from happening.
Yeah, and from another standpoint, I have been speaking to people who are sailors, seafarers, and they say, well, if I changed ship, everything is completely different on the bridge. Because, a ship owner hardly buys more than one or two, and then they modify it.
Yes.
They find out more things that they needed or different things that they needed, or they build it for a certain trade, and then people come on board and they've never been on board on that before, which is also a risk for them. I see it from their side.
Absolutely. Yeah, exactly. And that also, it goes to show that there's only so much one can train. Training is very important. Competence development is very important, but that's also that part is very standardized. But it is then up to the person to apply that in practice. And practice changes all the time. As you say, going from ship to ship, context to context, team to team, that requires a lot from a seafarer to apply that. And that's why it's so important to kind of lift that part of the responsibility from the seafarer. They train and they have the experience that is necessary, can we assume? But let's look more at the design phase and the procurement phase and what the organization around the seafarer can do to make sure that the systems are standardized and so that they are developed in a way that is intuitive and that supports decision processes for the end user.
It's not like buying 50 new lorries or something.
No.
Because they look the same, all of them, which is making things a little bit more complex.
Yes, we're still talking about people. We will always be talking about people.
Yes, wonderful people in the maritime industry. But I can also see, moving further down that road, I can also think about the knowledge. What kind of education are we offering to people in the industry, and what kind of new knowledge do we need from outside to get into our industry for us to learn from?
Yeah, that's a very, very good question. I think there are two elements that really need focus. Of course, we need the technical insights. We need to focus on this holistic risk management. So not just how a piece of technology works, but how it works in the context of a bigger system and how it works in the context of the modes of operation and how it will be used in practice. So that part will always be and is very, very important. But the other side of things is also the kind of the interpersonal skills, so that you can build on a culture where people can be open to identifying risks. We would call that kind of a creative worry. Are we aware of what can happen next, or are we aware of things that almost went wrong, but that we can learn from and feed back into the organization? So I think competence is also about building those strengths in people, that what they don't know yet, they can come to learn by being more resilient, being more able of picking up knowledge and experience and feeding that back into the organization. And then I'm not just talking about the seafarers, but also middle managers and managers on shore, of course, because they need to see just as much the importance of that so that they can create an infrastructure for receiving feedback, for receiving reports and working with those reports to improve practices. And this has everything to do with continuous improvements, that you need that mindset and training that focuses on creating that mindset in a company, in an organization, because that's what drives the robustness and the resilience of an organization forward.
So the time is over when people always reply, "We tried that before, it doesn't work."
Yeah, I would definitely say so. There's always room for improvement.
Yeah, but also, the culture on board a ship, I'm going back to the ship. Let's do that for a moment. I'm thinking about the way a ship is organized. The captain is at the top. And I would say that the crew will never say something against him or her, or be, innovative in their own environment, which I think maybe they should.
Yes, yeah. And of course, it's challenging. There are cultural challenges, culture from the point of view of nationalities. It might be something that's not in a person's nature, but I think we can work on that. And I think we also need to implement tools to facilitate it. So one of the things that I would advise or recommend is to consult people. As a captain, consult, ask for feedback, both positive and negative feedback. And that opens up the possibility to receive feedback, but also once the feedback is received, make sure that something is done with the feedback. So we all know that when we receive a survey or the question to participate in the survey, it becomes very demotivating when we don't hear anything back from the results. So if we consult someone about, how can we improve your working environment? How are you faring? How are you doing? Then try to come back also with results of that survey so that people stay motivated and know that their responses don't end up in a black box. And we see that that's often lacking. And then you cut off that feedback loop and you don't get that loop or that opportunity to continuously improve as an organization.
So now you're talking about leadership. Are we looking into a new era of new leadership in the maritime industry?
I would hope so. And it's not new, but it's difficult to implement. And I think just reiterating it is something that's extremely important, especially in the context of why it makes a difference. So what is the importance of leading by example, showing trust, leading through being approachable, through being transparent, through being personal, not necessarily private, but personal, that really builds that culture of trust, which improves the ability to improve, to change practices. And that in the end is what helps to make operations safer, because we can always improve and we can always change the ergonomics, the work organization, the way things are being done based on the experience on board. They are the eyes and ears. They are the people who are actually working with all the systems that we're talking about. So we need to draw it from them. But if we want to draw it from them, then they need to feel comfortable enough, or people call it psychologically safe enough, to share experiences. And that's where we can start in driving this, generating knowledge, generating experience, and collaborating.
As we just passed by the International Women's Day, I need to just talk about my prejudice to say that to me it sounds like we need more women in this industry.
Yeah.
I mean, I find it, maybe it's me, I don't know, I find women more easy to collaborate with, and they speak their mind in another way, and they build network and so on. And that's what we need.
Yes, I think there was a very nice quote of the Prime Minister in New Zealand as well, who was saying that some people say that showing empathy is a weakness in being a leader, but I think that's exactly what the strength is, and that's what her strength is as well. That's what she was quoting, that it's exactly that what's necessary to be able to connect with people. And we notice it now in terms of the pandemic as well. It's changing leadership in any way, because we really, if we can't be physically close to people, then we at least need to be as close as we can by showing compassion and showing empathy and being interested in the person behind the employee. And I don't think that's very different from what leadership otherwise should be, but we're just being, we're focused on it now because we're all in that same boat of having to connect with leaders or connect with our direct reports. And how do we do that? So on board ships, that would be just as relevant, trying to show that personal side, the people side, which maybe comes more naturally for women because we're less afraid of showing kind of our vulnerability. I don't know. I don't want to be too strong or prejudiced in that.
No. I take on that responsibility to be that. Don't you worry.
Yeah, in my way, it's worth reflecting on, definitely.
How do you see the future for shipping? How do you see, I mean, you have now identified things that we might have to discuss, and how do you see the future? What do you see?
Let me see it optimistically. I think if we achieve this increased collaboration, then we come a long way. I think that's what makes all the difference, that we don't hold our cards as close to our wrists as we tend to, as many of the shipping stakeholders do, but that we stay true to our expertise and acknowledge everyone's expertise, but that we use that to build upon each other, breaking down silos, collaborating, using each other's strengths to, the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. So I see the future in maritime as stakeholders working more together to achieve safer operations. And I would be very happy to see that this paper is a first step, or one of the first steps towards that, by highlighting what we need to do in order to, as an industry, achieve our ambitions in digitalization and decarbonization. This is a good alibi, I would say, to start talking together.
I am looking forward to that. It's an interesting discussion, and it's an interesting starting point to actually reach our goals that we collectively have to become carbon neutral and all of that.
Yeah.
So how do you think, I mean, I've got one soapbox. How do you think that the maritime industry could become more visible? Because we have seen that now in with the crew crisis and so on, that it has been hard for people to understand that there is a maritime industry just delivering everything from toilet paper to whatever we want. because we have been invisible. We've been the ones, the Cinderellas of the world in a way.
Taken for granted. Yes, that's a very difficult one. I think we shouldn't let it go as far as it becoming a reactive approach. It looks like it is, because people will start reacting when they can't get a hold of that new TV, which wasn't delivered to their local tech store because the container didn't arrive. But I think sketching that out to people is what can help, because I think there's a lack of understanding in society about what exactly this infrastructure is about. When we think of the shipping industry, most of us think of ships, that's it. But we don't see the whole picture of what it is we're shipping, where it's coming from, where it's going to, and how things are linked, and how incredibly intricate and complex it is. And specifically what role the seafarer is playing in that. And if the seafarers continue to stay in the difficult position that they're in, then everything will come to a grinding halt. And therefore we all have a responsibility to stand up and talk about this and help them get home, basically.
But it's also a momentum,
yes,
to speak about the entire maritime universe to everyone else.
Yeah.
Because now people are more aware about transport than they have ever been before.
Yeah, I think so too. And I think maybe just going back to the paper, particularly decarbonization, we have so much to show in terms of technology and expertise and what the maritime industry has achieved and can do. So if we can use that as a pointer and then use that, as a foot in the door to talk about maritime industry, and by the way, then that might draw people's attention, particularly the attention of people who otherwise are not involved or as much aware of the industry as others are.
Who would you be interested in listening to in the shipping podcast? Do you have any ideas, or I should talk to the next?
Oh gosh, I would be interested in maybe listening to someone from a charterer's perspective. I've been talking a lot to shipping companies, and they're often in a squeeze in terms of delivering what they will deliver for the charterers. And when we're talking about holistic risk management, what would their view be, and how do they see their role in ensuring that the technology works for the human in the context of the organization? I think they play an important role here, and particularly also in the current crisis, to see how we can take the pressure off the seafarers and make sure that they too are taking their responsibility in getting the seafarers home again.
Yeah, because they are also in a silo, and we are in another silo, and we need to break that down. We need to start collaborating. Unexpected collaborations. Yes. That is what we're looking forward to.
Yes, exactly.
Thank you very much, Fenna, for taking the time to speak to me, and best of luck. I hope you get a lot of interesting discussions going now once people have read the white paper, and I will make sure that it's available on the website of the Shipping Podcast as well.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure, and thank you for inviting me.
Thank you, Fenna. I look forward to participating in the discussion about the future of the maritime industry. We are living in exciting times, as I said before. I will put a link to the white paper in the show notes of this episode, so you can read the entire report and start your own discussion. I'm also wondering if you have subscribed to the Shipping Podcast newsletter yet. This podcast is released every other Friday, and so is the newsletter. So every other Friday you can listen to the podcast, and every other Friday there is a newsletter landing in your inbox if you have subscribed. I have so much to share with you. It's upcoming episodes, discussions about the current one, the episode that has just been released, and then I also share insights in different projects where I'm involved. If you enjoyed the podcast, I promise you will love the newsletter. So go to the website shippingpodcast.com and subscribe. The next episode of the Shipping Podcast is focusing on venture capital. and why the maritime industry is attracting more and more interest from capitalists. You do not want to miss that, I promise you. So, until the next time, from me to you, over and out. Thank you for listening to the Shipping Podcast. Don't forget to tell everyone that you meet that there is a shipping podcast available and that they should download it and listen to the maritime professionals who are sharing their passion for the shipping industry.